Field operative Dr. Sarah Chen works as a contracted trauma physician at Forward Operating Hospital Cascade, a classified facility where intelligence agents receive emergency care after black operations go catastrophically wrong. For 3 years, she has followed protocol without question. Stabilize, document, report upward. She never asks what happened. She never bends the rules. But when a series of agents begin dying from preventable complications, Sarah discovers something darker. Her superiors are withholding critical medications and equipment to force field operatives into early retirement. The cost of knowing too much is a slow death that looks like bad luck. When the next agent arrives, a young operative named Marcus, whom Sarah trained years ago, she faces an impossible choice: follow orders and watch him die, or break protocol and risk everything. What no one knows is that Sarah's silence has never been about obedience. It's about survival. She's hiding a classified failure from her own past, a field operation where her medical judgment cost lives. She thought she could hide behind procedure forever. But mercy doesn't stay buried. When she chooses to save Marcus by defying command, the truth about who she really is and what she's been running from surfaces in ways that force her final reckoning with duty, guilt, and the only redemption that matters: saving one more life. Chapter 1. The Protocol. That night, no one expected a simple emergency to expose the truth behind the quiet physician in the corner. What began as routine became the kind of story no one in that hospital would ever forget. The alarm came at 8:03:47 a.m., a code-red transport inbound. Sarah Chen's hands were already moving before the overhead speaker finished crackling. 23 years in emergency trauma, and the muscle memory never faded. Gloves snapped on, crash cart positioned, IV stations prepped. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless white drone as rain drummed against the reinforced windows of Forward Operating Hospital Cascade, the kind of facility that never appeared on any map. She stood in Bay 3, her dark eyes scanning the monitors with the detachment of someone who had learned, long ago, to watch death without flinching. Around her the night team moved with practiced silence. No one spoke in Cascade's emergency ward. Conversation left traces. Questions invited suspicion. The helicopter touched down on the pad outside. Sarah could hear the rotors winding down through the concrete walls, that metallic shriek followed by the hiss of depressurization. Footsteps thundered through the corridors, the transport team moving fast. They wheeled in a man on a gurney, 30-something, his tactical gear torn and blood-soaked. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, exit wound through the lower left quadrant. His breathing was shallow, pupils fixed and dilated. He was already in septic shock, not from the gunshot, but from something that had happened after. "Stats," Sarah said, voice level. "BP 78/44, heart rate 142, O2 sat dropping, temp 103, 8. Field team applied pressure dressing 4 hours ago, no antibiotics administered." The transport medic rattled off, his words clipped, efficient, emotionless. 4 hours, no antibiotics. In a combat field operation, that meant one thing: deliberate withholding. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "Protocol. Follow protocol. Don't ask questions. Don't look up the chain." She moved to his side, felt for the carotid pulse, thready, rapid. His skin was burning, clammy with sweat. The pressure dressing was old, crusted with dried blood and dirt. When she lifted it, the smell hit her. Not the copper tang of fresh blood, but the sweet, putrid rot of necrotizing tissue. Infection had colonized the wound days ago. "I need broad-spectrum antibiotics, stat, vancomycin, piperacillin tazobactam, and aggressive fluid resuscitation," Sarah said, not looking at anyone. The nurse hesitated, just for a second, barely noticeable. But Sarah had worked at Cascade long enough to read the micro-expressions of fear. "Doctor, the protocol memo came down at 2100 hours. Agents in critical condition with wounds older than 6 hours are to receive stabilizing care only. Antibiotics are restricted pending clearance from command. Sarah's hands froze over the operative's abdomen. She lifted her eyes to meet the nurse's. Say that again. Protocol updated. No advanced intervention without authorization from... I heard you the first time. Sarah looked down at the man's face. His eyes were tracking nothing, but there was still consciousness there, the small, animal awareness of someone drowning in fever and shock. She had seen that look before, years ago. In a desert she'd tried to forget. She grabbed a syringe, accessed the line, and reached for the medication cabinet. I can't allow that, the nurse said quietly. Her name was Jennifer. She had 3 kids and a husband who didn't know where she worked. She was terrified. There's a system. They're logging everything now. Dr. Chen, they fired Martinez last month for... I know what happened to Martinez. Sarah drew up the vancomycin herself, hand steady, jaw rigid. She administered it directly into the IV line. The antibiotic dripped clear into his bloodstream. Contraband, in the eyes of command. In the eyes of mercy, it was the only choice. Prepare for emergency surgery, she said. This infection has gone systemic. I'm debriding the wound tonight. Dr. Chen, authorization requires... I don't care what it requires. The words hung in the air, like a confession. She had just crossed a line. She had just become someone they'd been watching, someone who broke protocol. She had just become dangerous. The operative's hand moved, a tremor of consciousness. His fingers found her arm, gripped weakly. In his fever-bright eyes, she saw something that cut deeper than the rational part of her mind could defend against. Recognition, like he knew what she had just sacrificed for him. Hold him steady, Sarah said to the team, already moving to the surgical prep. We go in 5 minutes. As she scrubbed in, she caught her reflection in the mirror, pale, determined, afraid. The woman staring back wasn't just a trauma physician anymore. She was a mutineer, and in a place like Cascade, mutiny was never forgotten. It was only punished in the dark. Chapter 2. The Pattern. The operative survived. His name was Marcus Webb, and by morning the fever had broken. The infection was retreating under the weight of the antibiotics Sarah had smuggled into his veins. By day 3 he was conscious, asking for water, asking for a window view he'd never get. Sarah visited his recovery room at 06:15 a.m. before the day shift arrived. She always did now. It was her small rebellion, the moment when she could confirm that her decision to break protocol had meant something. Marcus was sitting up, color returning to his face. When he saw her, he tried to smile, but it faded when he read her expression. I broke protocol for you, Sarah said quietly, closing the door behind her. I want you to know that before you leave. I did something I'm not supposed to do, and I need you to understand why. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Why? Because you would have died otherwise. That's not how it works here, is it? People die. We accept it. Orders are orders. Sarah pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. Outside, the desert dawn was breaking pink and terrible against the fortress walls of Cascade. 3 months ago, a man named Rodriguez came through my bay. Gunshot wound similar to yours, field contamination, timeline too long. I followed protocol, stabilizing care only, no antibiotics. He died on day 5 from septic shock. She paused. 2 weeks later, another agent. Same presentation, same protocol, same outcome. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. I started keeping records. Sarah continued. Unofficial records. 12 agents in the past year who died from preventable infections. All of them received the same restriction order. No advanced intervention. All of them had gunshot or shrapnel wounds older than 6 hours. All of them were flagged in the medical database as potential security risks. Security risks? Marcus whispered. Agents who knew too much, who were becoming problems, who needed to be retired quietly in a way that looked like bad luck instead of murder. Sarah let that sit between them. The fluorescent light hummed. Rain had started again outside. It always rained in the desert this time of year, sudden and violent. My predecessor, Dr. Alvin Hayes, figured it out about 18 months ago, Sarah said. He filed a report with the IG. 3 days later, he was dead. Car accident on a highway he'd driven 1,000 times. No witnesses, no investigation. And you stayed. I had reasons. I still have them. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. But I'm done. I'm done watching people die because someone in command decided they're inconvenient. Marcus reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, but genuine. Thank you, he said, for breaking the rules. After she left his room, Sarah walked the corridors of Cascade in a daze. She had just told an operative everything. She had just made herself complicit in whatever came next. When he reported this conversation to his superiors, and he would, because everyone at Cascade reported everything, the consequences would be swift and total. She was already being watched. She could feel it. The cameras in the hallway, the way the administrative staff stopped talking when she passed, the delay in her medication orders. Cascade didn't forgive rebellion. Cascade eliminated it. But as she thought about Marcus breathing normally again, his infection retreating, his eyes clearing from the fever haze, she realized something. She was already dead. She had been dead for years. She just didn't know it. The woman walking these corridors was a ghost that had been hiding from a desert she'd tried to forget, a failure she'd tried to bury, a choice she'd made in combat that she'd spent 2 decades pretending was justified. Breaking protocol wasn't the beginning of her reckoning, it was the end of her hiding. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. The order to report to command came at 14:30 on a Wednesday, just as Sarah was preparing to discharge Marcus. She took it calmly, removed her surgical mask, and walked to the 3rd floor of Cascade, where the decision-makers sat in climate-controlled offices. Far from the blood and the crying and the sound of flatlined heartbeats, Colonel James Reeves was behind the desk, a man in his 60s with cold blue eyes, and the kind of authority that came from 40 years of making choices that other people died for. He didn't look up when Sarah entered. "Close the door, Dr. Chen." She did. "You administered Class A restricted medications to Operative Webb without authorization," Reeves said, still not looking at her. "That's a violation of protocol, a breach of operational security, and grounds for immediate termination of your contract." He was dying. He was under observation. His death would have been documented as a field complication. Happens all the time. Reeves finally raised his eyes. "You made a choice to interfere with command decisions. You've compromised your security clearance and compromised every agent in this facility. I saved his life. You saved his life temporarily. What you've really done is expose a program that has nothing to do with you." Reeves leaned back in his chair. "Do you understand what we do here, Dr. Chen? We manage operational continuity. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. Sometimes assets in the field become liabilities. We don't leave behind operatives who've been compromised. We retire them quietly, with dignity. They die on our terms." Sarah's stomach turned cold. He was saying it outright now, because he'd already decided what would happen to her. There was no point in pretending the protocol mattered. "Why did you keep me?" Sarah asked quietly. "If you're so concerned about security, why haven't I already had an accident? Car crash? Heart attack? Something sudden?" Reeves smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. "Because you were useful. You followed orders without question. You didn't ask about the patterns. You kept your mouth shut." His smile faded. "And because Colonel Director Hayes had some protection in place before his car accident. We knew if we moved on you too soon after him, questions would be asked." Hayes was protecting me? Hayes was protecting what he'd discovered. He left you enough breadcrumbs that if anything happened to you, certain people would know exactly where to look. It made you a liability we decided we could live with. Reeves stood up. But you've just removed yourself from that equation. You've proven you can't be controlled. That changes everything. Sarah's heart was hammering now, but her voice stayed level. What happens next? Next, you sign a separation agreement, return your credentials, and disappear. You get a new name, a new identity, and a generous settlement if you keep your mouth shut. You get a life. And if I don't, then you become a security risk like all the others. And we have protocols for that too. Sarah left his office without another word. Her hands were steady, but inside something was breaking. She'd known this was coming. She'd seen it in the pattern of protocol violations, in Hayes's death. In the careful way operatives were being eliminated, but knowing and accepting were different things. By the time she reached her quarters at Cascade, a small apartment in the secure residential section, she had made a decision. She was going to expose everything. Before they could silence her, before they could create an accident that looked like bad luck, she was going to take every record she'd kept, every name, every pattern, and she was going to send it to the one place that Cascade couldn't reach, the office of the Inspector General at the Pentagon, with copies to 3 independent journalists and the Senate Intelligence Committee. It took her 45 minutes to gather the files from the hidden partition of her personal computer. 45 minutes to compile the evidence that would prove that Cascade wasn't a medical facility. It was a killing machine dressed in white coats and bureaucratic language. She was uploading the final file when her door opened. 2 security officers, faces blank, expressions absolute. "Dr. Chen, you need to come with us." She looked at the computer screen. The file was 94% uploaded. "Where are we going?" she asked, standing slowly, her hands visible. "The director wants to speak with you again." As they led her down the corridor, Sarah heard the upload complete. The evidence was gone from her hands now, sent beyond Cascade's reach. In a few hours, people outside these walls would know what was happening here. The machine would grind to a halt. But first, she would have to survive the next conversation. Comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far the stories of real courage and silent sacrifice can travel. Chapter 4. The Facility. The interrogation room was exactly what Sarah had expected. Concrete walls, a steel table, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. She sat in the hard chair with her hands resting flat on the table, a gesture of complete compliance. Years of military training meant she knew exactly what Reeves wanted to see. 2 hours passed before he entered with another man she didn't recognize, younger, maybe mid-40s, with the deliberate gait of someone trained in violence. This man placed a folder on the table without saying anything, then stepped back into the shadows. Reeves opened it slowly. "You uploaded 247 files to external servers at 15:07 today," he said quietly. "Defense intelligence flagged the intrusion in real time. We captured the payload before it could reach the recipients." Sarah's breath caught, but she kept her face still. He was lying. They had to be lying. The upload had completed. "These files contain classified information, operational details, and the names of active intelligence operatives. You've just committed espionage, Dr. Chen. Do you understand that? That's not a security violation. That's treason. The information shows. I don't care what it shows." Reeves leaned forward. "What matters is that you're a federal employee who has deliberately transmitted classified materials to unauthorized parties. That's a capital offense in time of war, which, in case you've forgotten, is what we're in." The man in the shadows stepped forward and placed a thick binder on the table. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. It was her file, her complete personnel record, dating back 23 years, medical school transcripts, security clearances, commendations, and then more recent entries. Entries she'd never seen in her official record. Vacation days, cross-referenced with the dates agents had died, email records showing queries she'd never sent, access logs proving she'd been in the medication storage facility at times she'd been off duty, financial records showing money deposited to her accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was all fabricated, all of it. But it was perfect. Every digital footprint pointed to the same conclusion. Dr. Sarah Chen had been systematically murdering Cascade operatives and selling intelligence to foreign governments. "The evidence is already with the FBI," Reeves said calmly. "Filed this morning, actually, before you even attempted your little data theft. By tomorrow, you'll be arrested. Within a month, you'll be facing charges that carry a sentence of life imprisonment or death. Your career will be obliterated. Your reputation will be destroyed. Every choice you've made, every person you've helped, every moment of your life will be reframed as part of a criminal conspiracy." Sarah's mouth went dry. She understood now. This was the protocol for someone who broke protocol, not a car accident. Something worse, a complete and total character assassination delivered with legal precision. "There's another option," Reeves continued. "You sign a confession. You admit to the crimes. You agree to voluntary termination of your employment and your security clearance. You accept a dishonorable discharge, and then you disappear. New identity, new country. Enough money to survive comfortably somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States." "If I confess to crimes I didn't commit?" "Yes, exactly. You become a cautionary tale. Other doctors at other facilities understand what happens when they break protocol. The message gets sent through the system, clear and clean, and you get to live." Sarah stared at the fabricated evidence, at the digital prison they'd built around her. The cruel genius of it was that they didn't even need to kill her. They just needed to erase who she was. She would be marked as a traitor, a spy, a murderer. Even if she lived, she would exist in a kind of death, a ghost hunted by every government agency, every intelligence service, every law enforcement body on the planet. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until 800 tomorrow. After that, the FBI arrests you and the trial begins." Reeves stood. "I suggest you make peace with your decision, Doctor. Either way, the woman you were isn't coming back." She was returned to her quarters under guard. A single officer sat outside her door, visible through the reinforced window. Inside, the apartment felt like a cell. She sat on the bed in the darkness and waited for the weight of everything to crush her. But it didn't. Instead, something else rose up, something she'd kept buried for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. Anger, not at Cascade, not at Reeves, not at the system, but at herself, for running, for 23 years of running, for letting someone else's guilt become her prison. Chapter 5. The Desert. The thing about interrogation rooms is that they reveal the truth of who you are. Not the truth that Reeves had written into the files, but the deeper truth, the one you've been hiding from yourself. Sarah sat in darkness and let the memories come. Kandahar province. She was Captain Sarah Chen then, an army field surgeon attached to a special operations unit hunting a Taliban logistics coordinator named Amir Khalid. Khalid was wanted for coordinating IED attacks that had killed 17 soldiers in her region. The intelligence was good, the operation was sound. The problem was that Khalid's location was also a civilian hospital, the only medical facility for 40 kilometers. The command decision was simple. The op would go in during evening shift, after most staff had left. Fast, clean, minimal collateral damage. But Sarah was embedded with the unit, responsible for field triage, and when they breached the hospital, her role shifted. She wasn't healing anymore. She was covering fire, treating wounded soldiers, watching Khalid make his last stand in a pharmacy while orderlies screamed and IV stands fell like dominoes. They found children in the rooms upstairs, not hostages, students of a nearby madrasa that Khalid was using as cover. The unit medic, Sergeant Williams, was shot in the gut clearing the third floor. Sarah went up to retrieve him and saw the kids cowering in the storage room, 5 of them, 8 to 12 years old, terrified. In her official report, she noted that the children had been in the vicinity of an armed combatant's position, and her unit had been unable to confirm civilian status in real time. The truth was different. She'd seen them clearly. She'd made a choice. She told the soldier covering that exit to assume they were hostile if they moved. None of the children had survived the operation. Khalid was killed. Williams lived, retired, opened a barbershop in Denver. Sarah got a commendation and a posting to Bagram. She also got a conscience that never stopped talking. For 20 years she'd tried to outrun it. She'd volunteered for the hardest assignments, worked in the most dangerous hospitals, saved more lives in an attempt to balance the equation. But the scale never tipped. The dead children never became less dead. The guilt never transformed into redemption. Until Marcus Webb showed up with a gunshot wound and a fever and a look in his eyes that said he trusted her, just as those children had looked at her in that storage room. Sarah stood up in the dark apartment and walked to the window. The desert stretched out beyond Cascade's walls, flat and terrible and unforgiving. She had come to this facility thinking she could hide from her past by following orders, but the orders themselves were just another form of the same violence. She'd been looking for redemption in obedience. Instead, she'd found it in defiance. At 23:30, she wrote a message on paper, physical paper, nothing digital that Cascade could intercept. She described everything, the protocol, the deaths, the pattern of elimination, the fabricated evidence. She included every name she could remember, every date, every detail. Then she hid it inside the lining of her medical bag. At 06:00 a.m., she would make her choice, but it wouldn't be the choice Reeves offered her. Chapter 6. The Choice. The guard outside her door changed at dawn. Standard rotation. Sarah was ready. She dressed in her white coat, gathered her personal items, and opened the door as the new guard was checking his tablet. He was young, maybe 25. From one of the outer districts, probably on contract and eager to complete his rotation without incident. "I'm going to the medical wing for the morning briefing," she said, not asking for permission but stating fact. "I need to finalize the discharge papers for Operative Webb." The guard checked his assignment. Nothing in his orders said she was confined to quarters. Nothing said she was under arrest. Reeves would want her to feel like she had agency, like her choice of confession was her own. That was how they maintained control. "Okay, Dr. Chen. Don't take long." She nodded and walked. The corridors of Cascade were already humming with the morning shift. Nurses, medics, administrators moving through the sterile white hallways like ghosts. Sarah had worked here long enough to know every route, every blind spot, every section of the facility where the surveillance cameras had dead zones. She made it to the medical wing without encountering security. Marcus was being discharged today anyway. His presence at Cascade could only complicate matters now. She found him already dressed, sitting on his bed and looking out a window at the desert landscape. "We're leaving," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Marcus didn't ask questions. He moved on pure instinct, following her through the corridors with the silent efficiency of an operative who understood that explanations could wait. They moved toward the pharmacy storage area, a section of Cascade that was less monitored because it was technically civilian contractor space. There she found exactly what she'd been counting on. Dr. William Okafor, the head of Cascade's pharmaceutical distribution, a man who'd lost his son to an IED in Helmand Province and had quietly been helping Sarah document the medication discrepancies for the past 8 months. "Is it time?" he asked, seeing her face. "It's time," Sarah confirmed. William nodded, and with practiced efficiency, he led them through the pharmacy to a loading dock used for supply deliveries. A civilian truck sat idling. William's nephew was driving, young and nervous but loyal to a family that had lost everything to the machine that Cascade represented. "Your medical bag?" William asked. Sarah held it up. The message about everything was sewn into the lining. They had maybe 5 minutes before someone noticed her missing from the briefing. 5 minutes before the facility went into lockdown. Sarah moved on instinct now, the years of military training replacing conscious thought. She, Marcus, and William climbed into the back of the truck. The nephew pulled away from the loading dock at normal speed, not rushing. Just another supply driver leaving Cascade at the scheduled departure time. The gates opened automatically. They weren't designed to keep people in. They were designed to keep people out. For a moment, Sarah thought they might actually make it. For a moment, she thought the calculations had been correct, the timing aligned, the plan functional. Then the overhead lights switched to red. The gates froze, halfway open. A voice crackled over the PA system. "All personnel. Lockdown protocol. Medical emergency. Close all exits." "Go," Sarah said to the nephew. "Now." The truck accelerated toward the partially open gate. They were going to hit it. The metal barrier was too low, the gap too narrow. For a split second, Sarah felt the certainty of failure, of capture, of everything falling apart. Then they were through. Metal scraped against metal. The gate shrieked. Alarms screamed. They were outside Cascade. The desert stretched before them in all directions, empty and boundless and free. If this story has already moved you, hit the like button. It helps more people discover stories of compassion and duty. Chapter 7. The Exposure. The safe house was in Tucson, a nondescript adobe building in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions. William had arranged it months ago, just in case the weight of the truth became too much to carry alone. Sarah and Marcus arrived at dusk, and for the first time in 24 hours, she allowed herself to stop moving. She had already made contact with the journalists, calls from secure phones, bought with cash, messages left on encrypted platforms. By now, the files she'd sent before her arrest attempt would have been retrieved from the servers. The IG's office would be reviewing them. The Pentagon would be in chaos. But Cascade had already moved too. Their fabricated evidence against her was already in the FBI system. Her face would be on watch lists, her bank accounts frozen, her medical license suspended pending investigation. She was officially a traitor and a spy and a murderer, at least until the truth caught up. Marcus sat across from her in the safe house kitchen, eating the first real food he'd had in days. He'd stopped asking questions about the plan. Instead, he asked about her. "The children in Kandahar," he said quietly. "That's what this is about, isn't it?" Sarah looked at him startled. She'd never told anyone about that night. "How did you—" "I have access to certain files," Marcus said. "Before Cascade locked everything down, I pulled your complete record. Not the official one, the real one. There's a memo from 2003, stamped as classified, flagged as a potential incident requiring further review. It mentions a field operation, civilian casualties, recommendations that your psychological fitness for continued service be assessed." He paused. "They closed the investigation because your commanders thought you were more valuable as an active asset than as a cautionary tale." Sarah realized that she'd never truly hidden anything. Cascade had known everything. They'd simply chosen not to act on it because her knowledge of their own crimes made her useful. She was leverage against herself. "Those children had nothing to do with the war," Sarah said quietly. "They were students. learning mathematics and poetry probably, and I gave an order that ensured they wouldn't live to grow up. And since then? Since then, I've tried to save so many people that the math might eventually balance out, as if it could, as if mercy was a commodity you could accumulate. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. You broke protocol to save me. That's not a transaction. That's not karma or redemption or balance. That's just one human choosing another human over a system that wants to eliminate them. That's what matters. Sarah's phone buzzed. A news alert. Pentagon investigates alleged wrongdoing at classified medical facility. Then another. FBI director promises full review of intelligence practices. And then, whistleblower claims pattern of deliberate deaths in covert operations. It was beginning. The machine was grinding into motion. The people in power would deny everything, investigate thoroughly, protect their own, and ultimately many would survive this, but some would fall. Some would be exposed, and Cascade, as it currently operated, would be dismantled. Sarah didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted. She felt like a woman who had finally stopped running and discovered that the place she'd stopped was still a kind of prison. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. 3 weeks later, Sarah was in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., testifying before a closed-door Senate committee about what she'd witnessed at Cascade. She wore a simple gray suit and spoke with the precise clinical detachment of a physician describing medical observations. The senators listened with the expressions of people who had known, at some level, that this kind of thing was happening and had chosen not to look too closely. By the time she finished, the room was absolutely silent. The evidence she'd presented, not just the files she'd uploaded, but the physical documentation, the testimony of Marcus and William and 3 other operatives she'd contacted through secure channels, constituted proof that Cascade had operated a systematic program to eliminate intelligence assets deemed too compromised to live. Dr. Chen, one of the senators began, his voice carefully neutral. You understand that these accusations represent a grave charge against military leadership and the intelligence apparatus. I understand, Sarah replied. I also understand that every word I've spoken is accurate. The senator exchanged glances with his colleagues. And you realize that these allegations will be investigated thoroughly and will likely result in either significant reform or significant denials and obfuscation. Sarah met his eyes. Yes, Senator. I'm aware of how these things typically work. After her testimony, she was escorted to a safe location, a modest hotel in Arlington, where federal witnesses waited for the machinery of justice to grind through its processes. She had been assured that her identity would be protected, that she would receive immunity in exchange for her testimony, that she could start a new life. The problem was that she didn't know who she was anymore. She was not Captain Sarah Chen. That woman had died in a hospital in Kandahar in 2003. She was not Dr. Sarah Chen. That woman had been erased by Cascade's fabricated records. She was a name that didn't exist, a ghost in a hotel room, a person who had broken every rule and paid the price and still didn't know if it had been worth it. Marcus came to see her the evening after her testimony. The Federal Protection Program had approved his visit under security. He looked different, healthier, the fever entirely gone, the wound healing properly now that he was receiving real medical care in the civilian world. He looked like someone who had survived something. It's starting, he said as he sat down. Word is spreading through the intelligence community. People are panicking, denying, blaming subordinates. Already there are calls for Cascade to be investigated by 3 separate oversight bodies. The Director of National Intelligence has demanded a full review of all classified medical protocols. How long will it last? Sarah asked. The investigation? Probably 6 months. The cover-ups and reassignments will happen faster than that. Some people will lose their security clearances. Some will retire early. Some will move to different agencies where they can continue doing the same work under different oversight. And the agents who died? The 12 that I documented? Marcus's expression hardened. Their families will be contacted. They'll receive some compensation, probably classified. The cause of death will eventually be released as operational complication or something equally vague. There will be apologies that admit nothing, and within a year, Cascade will reopen under a different name with different policies that are essentially the same. So nothing changes. Something changes, Marcus said. You changed. You stopped being part of the machine. You forced people to see what they'd been ignoring. That matters, even if the system survives, even if most of the people in charge remain in charge. Sarah looked out the window at the lights of Arlington, the infrastructure of power that would continue functioning, whether she participated in it or not. She had thought that exposing Cascade would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like the smallest possible act of resistance against something so vast and entrenched that her entire life was barely a ripple against its surface. Chapter 9. The Return. 6 months later, Sarah Chen, using her real name again, though she wasn't sure why she was entitled to it, returned to the civilian world. The immunity deal had protected her from prosecution. Though she'd permanently lost her medical license as part of the settlement, she wasn't allowed to practice medicine anymore. She wasn't allowed to hold a security clearance. She wasn't allowed to speak publicly about her experiences at Cascade without facing civil penalties. She took a job at a community health clinic in Albuquerque, working as a clinic administrator. No surgeries, no emergency medicine, no life or death decisions. Just paperwork, patient scheduling, and the quiet work of keeping a facility running for people who had nothing and needed care anyway. Marcus had relocated to the same city, using a new identity that the protection program had provided. He worked in construction, doing honest labor for regular wages, and in the evenings, he volunteered at the same clinic where Sarah worked. It was there, one evening in October, that Sarah realized something unexpected. She was starting to heal. Not from the guilt, that would never fully leave. Not from the memories of Kandahar, or the faces of the agents she'd watched die, or the weight of knowing that her small act of resistance had changed almost nothing in the vast machinery of power. But from the silence that had preceded everything. She was healing from the running. A young woman came into the clinic one evening, Maya Rodriguez, 17, with a badly infected cut on her arm from a workplace accident. She was terrified of hospital costs, terrified of legal trouble because she was undocumented, terrified of being vulnerable in a system that didn't want to see her. Sarah treated the wound personally, despite her administrative position. She cleaned it, applied antibiotics, wrapped it carefully, and looked the girl in the eyes and said, "You're going to be fine. Come back in 3 days so I can check it. There's no cost. You don't have to give your legal status. You just have to heal." As Maya left, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. "You broke protocol," he said quietly. "I know," Sarah replied. "Good," Marcus said. "Never stop." That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment and wrote a letter to the families of the 12 agents who had died at Cascade. She couldn't send it through official channels. The settlement prohibited that. So she did it the only way she could. She described their names, their injuries, the patterns that had killed them, and the names of the people in command who had decided they were too compromised to live. She wrote it longhand, physical evidence that couldn't be erased or manipulated. She mailed copies to journalists who had covered the initial scandal, people who might find a way to get the truth to the families regardless of legal barriers. It was a small act, infinitesimal against the machinery, but it was hers. It wasn't given by a system or required by protocol or demanded by authority. It was simply a choice, the oldest and most human kind of choice, to bear witness to the dead. Sarah understood now why Hayes had died protecting her, why Marcus had survived the fever, why the world still spun on despite everything she'd tried to expose and everything that had been revealed and denied and quietly buried in new regulations that amounted to nothing. Healing wasn't about winning. It wasn't about overcoming the system or proving you were right or accumulating enough mercy to balance the scales. Healing was the simple, infinitesimal act of choosing one more time to save someone, knowing that the systemic violence would continue anyway, knowing that protocol would reassert itself, knowing that the machine would grind on. But you chose to heal anyway. You bore witness anyway. You defied protocol anyway, because in the end, that was the only redemption that mattered, not victory over the system, but participation in the quiet resistance of human compassion against the mathematics of power that wanted to reduce everyone, soldiers, operatives, patients, healers, to acceptable losses. Sarah fell asleep knowing she would never be free of what she'd seen at Cascade. But she also knew, for the first time in 23 years, that she was finally free from the burden of hiding. Epilogue. On a morning in November, Sarah returned to the clinic and found a handwritten note slipped under her office door. To whoever is reading this, my brother Michael died at a facility like the one described in the news. The doctors there told us it was operational complication. We never believed them. Reading Dr. Chen's testimony confirmed what we'd always known. He didn't have to die. Someone decided he was a liability. Someone chose to let him fade rather than see him heal. If you're the woman who broke protocol to save even one life, I want you to know, my brother's death wasn't random. It was a choice. And your choice to tell the truth, even though it changed almost nothing, it matters to us. It means someone saw him, someone stopped hiding. That's not redemption, that's just the basic human act of bearing witness. But after they tried so hard to make us forget, bearing witness feels like everything. Sarah folded the letter carefully. She didn't respond, she couldn't, legally, but she kept it in her desk, and on days when the weight of everything threatened to pull her under, she read it again. Because that was what she'd learned at Cascade and what she was continuing to learn in the quiet clinic in Albuquerque. Redemption wasn't about winning or changing the system or proving you were right. It was about the simple, stubborn insistence on saving one more life, even knowing that the machinery would continue, even knowing that mercy was finite and insufficient. It was about defying protocol, not because you believed it would work, but because not defying it meant becoming part of the machine. And so, Sarah Chen returned to work, to the small health clinic where nobody asked about her past and where she was finally allowed to heal without running. She had stopped hiding, and that, it turned out, was enough. Subscribe for more stories of courage, healing, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Protocol Doesn't Allow That. See you in the next one.